Hello and welcome to this Filbert Flies review of FlyTampa's Sydney Airport add-on for Microsoft Flight Simulator. You join me on approach to runway 16 right, and as always I'm starting with an approach to give you a look at the surrounding area and also the opportunity to gauge the performance of this add-on on my system, which is comprised of an i7-8700K processor, 32GB of RAM and a 1080 Ti graphics card. On the subject of performance, you will notice a few stutters both during this approach and later when we look around the airport with the drone camera. They're not quite as bad as they look in the video, they're not catastrophic or long, but they are there in the sim, so that's worth bearing in mind if you have a lower spec system than mine. The severe stuttering you'll see just after touchdown is not present in the sim at all. It's a feature of my video recording software, which I suspect can only be turned off with a significant investment in new hardware. And on the subject of approaches, I initially tried to film the ILS approach in the opposite direction, to 3-4 left, but unfortunately the ILS is very broken there. Both the localizer and the glide slope are incorrectly aligned. Anyway, enough chat for now. I'll let you watch the landing in peace, and I'll speak to you again at a gate when we'll have a good look around the scenery together in different weather and lighting conditions.
Retard. 10. Drive.
Welcome to Sydney. We're parked up here at gate 33 of the International Terminal, and we'll have a little look at the jetway connecting before beginning our tour of the airport. So as you can see, the jetway hood does go through the aircraft skin ever so slightly, but once it's connected it looks pretty realistic. Let's have a look at the jetway itself while we're here. So this is a custom model and it's very nicely done. There's a good amount of detail, like these rust patches, and overall it looks very realistic. Let's move on to having a look at the texturing and modelling of some of the terminal buildings. Now this is a huge airport and I'm not going to be able to show you every inch of it without you falling asleep, but I'll show you some representative bits. So this is Pier B at the International Terminal, and you'll notice that it's nicely modelled and the texturing's pretty good as well. We've got a good amount of weathering at the top here. If you get very close, the textures do look a little bit blurry, but they look plenty crisp enough from an aircraft cockpit perspective. The windows unfortunately are not transparent, they use flat textures, but as flat textures go they look pretty convincing. FlyTampa have included some transparent glass and interior modelling, but sadly this small section of the International Terminal is it. For what it's worth, they've done a really nice job. The windows are nicely tinted and the interior modelling is done to a very high standard, as you can see. The windows do disappear when you look at them from the inside, but this is a common issue with a lot of add-on scenery. I just wish there was more of this sort of thing throughout the rest of the airport. This is the northernmost part of the International Terminal and the International 1 apron, and this area gives a good impression of the sort of details that are included with this scenery. So as well as very good modelling and texturing, we have things like these ramps down which look very nice, and signage like this which really adds to the atmosphere of the airport. Away from the apron area, FlyTampa have included a lot of details, some of which I've never seen before, such as this animated lift. We also have a nice amount of modelling in this terrace area here, and in the landside part of the airport we have the surrounding buildings modelled, we have some custom vegetation, we have parked vehicles, buses, cars, other things, and we have a really nicely modelled canopy out the front of the International Terminal, which includes some transparent glass. This is the domestic terminal and the domestic 2 apron. As we come down, you'll notice that the buildings have been modelled and textured to the same high standard as those at the international terminal. Unfortunately, we do have flat glass textures and no transparent glass here. The windows are, however, reflective because they make use of PBR materials, and the textures look pretty convincing. FlyTampa have done a great job with the landside area at the domestic terminal as well, with these bridge structures very nicely modelled, and again a good amount of life in and around the airport terminal building. Again, the details go quite a long way back from the airport, with car parks and surrounding buildings very nicely modelled. It is slightly disappointing to see this blurry default satellite imagery on the ground level, but you won't notice it too much because there is so much elevated roadway and other things at height which obscure it. To the north of the domestic terminal we have this maintenance area and these Qantas hangars, which have been very nicely modelled in textures. As you'll see as we get closer, the textures are very nice and crisp, and they look very realistic indeed. This is apron Dom 1A, where the domestic terminal's remote stands are situated. As you can see, this building also is very nicely modelled and textured. It has an open door, and it generally looks very realistic. But this shot also shows just how much attention to detail has been paid to the surrounding area. Just take a look at this Qantas building here. FlyTampa really have gone to town with the modelling, even outside the airport's perimeter. Here we have the airport fire station with a fire engine parked out the front of it, and we even have a fluttering Australian flag, which is very nice to see. And just around the corner you will notice the point at which this main road goes underneath the airport, and this has been nicely modelled as well. Unfortunately the cars do disappear when they hit the black wall here inside the tunnel, but from the taxiway it looks absolutely fantastic. Here's the control tower, and it's been very nicely modelled and quite nicely textured. No transparent glass again, unfortunately, but we do have some nice features like that radar spinning on top and the aerials surrounding it. There's one static aircraft included with this scenery, and that is this Qantas A380 parked off on a remote stand. Now, I know everyone has differing opinions on static aircraft, and you all know mine by now. I would like to have them, but I'd like the option to turn them off if I want to. I believe that this here is a custom modelled baggage train, which is very nice to see. In terms of other ground clutter, we do have a little bit of it scattered around. We have buses, the odd pushback tug, the odd luggage dolly, and some containers. But if I was being super critical, I would say we could have done with a little bit more. The airport does feel a tiny bit on the lifeless side. It's ground texture time, and I've said it before but I'll say it again. FlyTampa are absolute masters of ground textures. They can always be relied upon to create a very realistic ground surface. You'll notice that we have a good amount of discoloration, some rubber marks, and other little anomalies in the ground textures which make them look very realistic. Attention to detail has been paid to using the correct materials and colouring them correctly, and having compared this with the Google satellite imagery, I would say they've done a very good job indeed. Even down to things like this transition between the two materials over here, the jagged edges closely match the real thing. So, nothing to complain about here at all. I'm a particular fan of these custom puddles which you will find scattered around the place. They really add an extra level of realism. The grassy areas, by and large, are very nicely done as well. You'll notice a good variety of thicknesses of grass, and the foliage looks different to that in Europe, which I like. If I'm going to fly all the way out here from Heathrow, which I'd like to think I might one day when we have a decent long-haul airliner, then I want it to look different to Heathrow, and it certainly does. My only criticism of the grassy areas are these transitions between the grass and the tarmac, which do look a little bit blurry. That's not something you're likely to notice as you taxi along in an aircraft, but it does spoil the immersion slightly if you're zooming around in a drone as I am. The taxiway signage is very nicely modelled and nice and crisp. And no surprises here, the runways look absolutely fantastic. The textures used are super crisp, and there's a good amount of detail included, even down to the grooves in the runway surface, which you can see very clearly. So, incredible job once again. Here's Kingsford Smith Airport by night. I really like the apron lighting. These floodlights create very realistic pools of light beneath them. I really like the light coming from inside this part of the terminal where we have transparent glass which remains tinted. That looks very, very convincing to me. The taxiway and runway lights look great. I really like the night lighting on the landside areas. But, to be blunt, I really hate the nighttime window textures that have been used across the airport for the 99% of buildings that don't have any transparent glass. We've got this same repeating blue pattern with white lights, and it doesn't look realistic. Now, don't get me wrong, I've seen plenty worse from other developers, but we know that FlyTampa can do better than this from both Copenhagen and Las Vegas. It really is like chalk and cheese when you compare this airport with either of those. Here's Sydney in the rain, and as you can see, the ground textures look really very nice indeed when they are wet and reflective. So, what do I think of FlyTampa Sydney? Well, I have very high expectations of FlyTampa's airports, because they've been one of the best scenery developers for a very long time, if not the best. And what I've found is that this airport is very, very good, but in the context of their other work, it's left me feeling a little bit underwhelmed. Let's get the negatives out the way first. The biggie for me is the broken ILS to runway 34 left. I have no concept of how easy these are to fix, so I'm tempted to cut FlyTampa a little slack because, after all, I presume it's the default NavBlue data that's causing the issue. At the same time, I know that certain freeware developers have found missing ILSs and have managed to implement them from scratch, so I would have thought that a developer of FlyTampa's caliber could have solved this, but I don't know for sure. The second fairly major negative for me is the quality of the opaque window textures at night. I have no real problem with opaque window textures. If they're done well, see Gaia's Florence and Vienna for example, they can look really good. Not quite as good as transparent glass with interior modelling behind it, but still good enough to create the impression of a lit terminal interior. The trouble with these textures is that they are uniform, repeating, and generally a bit unrealistic. They're similar in quality to those plasticky looking textures at Simwing's Ibiza, which I was really disappointed by, and I expected a bit more from FlyTampa. So I'd ideally like to see them replaced with the sort of transparent glass that was so beautifully implemented in their Las Vegas scenery, or failing that, at least with detailed high-resolution images that look like the interior of an actual airport, preferably this one. But putting all that behind us, forgetting about my high expectations of FlyTampa and putting this add-on into the context of all the other add-ons that have been released to date for Microsoft Flight Simulator, it is very, very good. The negatives I've spoken about pale into insignificance compared with the huge number of positives. The modelling is fantastic and the buildings are beautifully textured. The ground textures are just incredible. The attention to detail, both airside and landside, is impressive, and considering the size of the place and the amount of work that's clearly gone into it, I think the $17.99 asking price is very reasonable. I'll say it again, this is a very, very good airport. There you have it. I hope you found this review useful. If you have, please do click the thumbs up button, subscribe if you haven't already, and if you'd like to donate a little something to my channel via the Streamlabs link in the top left now or the buymeacoffee.com link in the description, I'd really appreciate it. Your money will go towards a new graphics card. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon here on Philbert Flies. Bye bye.